This, so they should be really good at spelling, really good at these other matters that are basically structural and mechanical. We want to give rise to their creativity. Well, in the first place, I see nothing about the attention to structural and mechanical matters that stands in the way of creativity, because it's discipline, and creativity requires discipline. Secondly, it's seriously handicapping. It's our responsibility and our fault that the present-day students are not prepared. We need to pay more attention to basics. We don't need to be mean. We need to be definitive. We need to be kinder to basic needs and basic necessities of grooming them, and we aren't. Which is to individualize. It works better. People need to be honored as separate, distinct entities. Well, again, this is partly a matter of affluence. This country is affluent. One of the representations or indicators of affluence is huge portions. When you have a meal in a French restaurant, let's say you're in Paris or Bordeaux or someplace, or other countries throughout the world, the portions are more modest, more moderate. One of the big enemies is the inconceivably huge portions, plus lack of parental involvement in many cases in modifying this. Parents do it too. We gorge ourselves. We're an affluent society, and we are ingesting the visible representations of affluence with no restraint, or should I say no, with insufficient restraint. Then you have the swing of the pendulum to almost unnatural attention to being skinny, which of course has at its most extreme anorexic and bulimic results, as almost a diametrical polarized opposite. Well, I mean, if you take care of it in the first place, if what you stand for, what you serve, what you regard as desirable is moderate, then you don't have to swing in the extreme reserve. So it's a complicated problem, which I think is absolutely an external indicator of some of the ills of our society. That entitles me to be able to park at all kinds of places because, you know, I'm handicapped. Well, I'm not saying this facetiously. Actually, as I've mentioned before, I've had both hips replaced. I'm the bionic woman with two titanium hips. Hard question to compare movies of one era to another. I'll tell you why. Any art form is a representation of the culture from which it springs. So when we have movies that are radically different from movies where you have the slick, well-groomed hero and heroine in the old days, that's because the anti-hero with a grungy look is today's hero. And if that's the way it is, that's the way it is. We can't represent an era, if we're representing today, validly and honestly, if we cadge off the past or a past that no longer exists. So I say that you have to judge movies in terms, to an extent, of the society that give rise to them, that gives rise to them. And that you can't categorically evaluate them only in those terms. It would be inadequate as a barometer. Yeah, of Andy Warhol. I saw an exhibit of his at the Museum of Modern Art downtown. He had an exhibit there too, I think, at one point. But in any case, before seeing the exhibit, I had a preconceived notion about him that this is not exactly the sort of art that I think is particularly good. When I saw his work more extensively at the exhibit, I was amazed. I was much more impressed by his artistry, the depth of it, than I expected to be. I was really surprised. So the reversal of Roe versus Wade would be a tragedy that's right in line with the present administration's most dearly cherished aims and purposes, which is to place society back at least a century. Sure, everybody gets lonely. It's not excruciating. You live through it. You get lonely living with other people too. Sometimes lonelier. I found out I was pregnant at that time with our first child. This did not mean that I had to go back to the marriage, but I think I did care enough. I wanted it to work too. Look, in a city like this, if I don't drive, I have to make elaborate plans as to how to get around, don't I? And there's no way that I could possibly exist without being able to get around. Except maybe someday when I'm old enough so I'm not physically able to do it, I'll have to make that adjustment. In which case I'll do it. Because after all, the life that an older person has and a person with a different past necessarily is not the life of your children. And you can be both burdensome and intrusive if you expect them, oh, I'm not feeling well, oh, I'm unhappy. I mean, this is ridiculous. Go out there and do something and make yourself happy, for heaven's sakes. And since I've always had a sense of joyousness about life, I've had my tough times, because everybody has got tough times. I've had my periods where I felt bad about things, but I always underneath had that feeling, first of all, this is going to end, this negativity. And I have a feeling of ultimate joyousness. I live today as an individual in my own terms, and that's the way it should be for me. Of course I'm subject to certain constrictions, everybody is, and I observe those, but the fact of living in my own terms as an independent individual is important.